On that note, John, it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thanks, Guy. It's really a thrill for me to, having watched a little bit of what you do out there in the leadership spectrum. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I often say to, not all of my guests, but I often say to some of my guests, I'm actually more excited to have you on than you might be to be here, because I'm still in that sort of slightly kind of heady kind of reality of having great people on. So yeah, thank you so much. It's huge.
Let's hope you feel that way by the end of it too.
Yes, I see what you said there. So listen, so I know who you are, John. I will have done a little bit of an intro at the start. This is the way I kind of approach all of these now, and it'd be great just to get a sense of who you are, the position that you inhabit, and the context that you operate in.
Yeah, sure. So for all the folks that are listening out there and watching, I am a Major General in the United States Army. I've been in the United States Army about 33 years. My current position is as the commander of United States Army Cadet Command. So our job at Cadet Command is to build Army officers for the active force, the U.S. Army Reserve Force, and the U.S. Army National Guard. Some people perceive that all of our officers come from West Point for the active duty force. That's not, it's very different from the British model, in that all of the officers that work in the British Army will either go to Sandhurst full-time or they will do a finishing year at Sandhurst. We don't do that in the United States Army. Most of our cadets, or most of our officer leaders, about 65% of them, go to a four-year college or university somewhere in the United States. And we've got about 975 of them that have cadets across the United States, and they participate in an Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program. It doesn't mean they'll go into the reserves. They may very well, and many of them do, go into the active force, but that's what we do. And then I'm dual-hatted here in the central part of the state of Kentucky in the United States as the commander for Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I have two roles, to lead Cadet Command, and also to be kind of the mayor, if you will, of this small Army community of about 25,000 in the middle of Kentucky.
You didn't just use the word small, did you? And then say 25.
Well, it's relative, right? So by Army standards, Fort Bragg's about 150,000. Fort Knox is about 25,000. So
I think this is the UK-US economy of scale thing.
I think it is. And we can talk about that with the armies too, because sometimes I tend to forget. For an economy of scale force, our Brit allies punch above their weight in every class.
Well, it's good for you to say. I was in Allen, Texas some moons ago, and it didn't look that big on the map until somebody actually explained how big it was. I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Pretty big, yeah.
So, well, listen, it's fantastic to have you here, and we're going to kind of do a visitation of the buffet of John and what you do. And I'd really like to, and I do this with everybody because I always think it's almost as interesting to know how somebody got to where they are as to the reality of what they do. So it'd be lovely just to hear that journey that got John to be where John is now.
Yeah, it's interesting because that is a question that I get a lot from Army ROTC cadets across the country when I talk to them at one of the ROTC programs at a college or university, or when they come here in the summer. We bring about 10,000 of them here for about 3 months, spread out across the summer. And I get to talk to large groups of them. And they always say, hey, sir, how did you get in the Army? Why did you want to be in the Army? Why did you become an ROTC cadet? So if I back it up a little bit, I'll tell you that I was raised in a strong family. My father went to one of our senior military colleges here in the United States called the Citadel. It's in Charleston, South Carolina. And although he did not go into the military because he suffered a hearing loss as a result of a football injury, he was a college football player. He instilled, I think, in me and my brothers, this very, very strong belief in service and selflessness. And so when I went to Appalachian State University, that's where I got my undergraduate degree. It's a small school in the mountains of North Carolina. I enrolled in the ROTC program there just to see what it was about. I didn't really know much about it. I didn't have this driving desire to be an Army officer. I thought I would test the waters and find out what it was about. And I really took to it, really enjoyed the experience, got involved in a couple of the small groups that do small unit tactics and those types of things, war games, for lack of a better term, I guess, but really enjoyed the outdoor element of that, the challenge, the physical challenge, the mental challenge, and was commissioned there out of Appalachian State University into the active force. I'd planned to be a lawyer. I decided I'm not going to be a lawyer. What should I do? Well, maybe I'll be an infantry guy. And then one of my professors of military science said, hey, have you ever thought about flying? And I said, well, yeah, I'd love to fly. My father was in Air Force ROTC at the Citadel. He wanted to be a pilot, was unable to do that, but I'd love to fly. I enjoy, the air and activities in the air. And so I actually branched into Army aviation, was very fortunate to receive that branch. And then the course of my career has been really just a blessing, based on the people, frankly, that I've worked with, that I have either surrounded myself with or by pure providence have surrounded me. Starting with time in the 82nd Airborne Division as an Apache pilot. I went to the Gulf War in 1990 and 91 and flew there against Saddam Hussein's forces the first time we did that. And then transitioned from the conventional Army aviation into Special Operations Aviation. And so for folks that may not know a lot about what we do for Special Operations, you can Google this afterwards, but I was part of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment for about 22 years, the Night Stalkers. When people ask who they are, I say we're the Black Hawk Down guys, because most people know the movie Black Hawk Down. That was our element that did the flying in Somalia there for that force that was going after some of the terrorist elements that were manifest in Somalia. I was not there during the Somalia action. I got there about a year and a half later. But starting in about 1995, I was part of the 160th until about 2014, at which point I had the opportunity, a very unique opportunity, after I'd already been to the Naval War College as an Army officer. I had an opportunity to work directly for the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Army as a senior fellow, or as a federal fellow, if you will, at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., which is one of the very well-known think tanks. Obviously, I worked on the national security and defense side there at Brookings for a year, writing and reading and blogging and talking and exploring and really expanding myself strategically in that job. And I was fortunate enough while I was in that job to be selected to be a general officer in the United States Army. And my first general officer assignment was as the Deputy Commanding General for the 2nd Infantry Division in the Republic of Korea, the Indian Head Division, an amazing opportunity and job. I'd never served in Korea before. That is really a microcosm unto itself. Everywhere else in the world, we think about terrorism, we think about the big threats of Russia and China and whatever the case may be. I can tell you things are very simple. In the Republic of Korea, you focus on North Korea. That's what you do. And so really got to drill down on what that threat presents to the world and to democracy writ large and to Korean forces and U.S. forces that serve with them. And then I came out of that job and did 2 years back at Fort Bragg, back into Special Operations Aviation as part of Army Special Operations Aviation Command, was the commanding general there. And then I arrived here at Fort Knox in 2018 and have been in command of Cadet Command now for about 32 months and will find myself transitioning out of this job in the summer of 21. So just an amazing and blessed journey for me. And I'll tell you, much of it, any success I've enjoyed really belongs to the people that I've been able to work with and the people that surround me. I will absolutely take possession of my failures, but my successes belong to them.
I almost want to go, wow. So I'm going to allow myself to say, wow. These things are easily said, but, hard lived, I often think.
Sure.
When you say these, and just the fact that you say Apache helicopter pilot, I think means that you've won that conversation. So
it was a lot of fun, and then I got to fly lots of other aircraft in the 160th too, just as much fun. So I
met a gentleman once who was a Harrier jump jet fighter pilot, and I said, yeah, okay, well you've won the contest then, because apart from astronaut, I think that's about as cool as it gets.
That's a pretty unique aircraft too. So
so listen, that's a fascinating journey, and you use that. You're very humble in the way that you approach that. But I do have a phrase, which is you get the team that you deserve. And so there is an element to that says people need to be put into position. They need to be managed, coached, performance managed, sometimes exited, because, if you don't do the good stuff and the hard stuff, then you end up with whatever you end up with. So I'm intrigued then, as in the role that you have now, and I will go back a little bit in time maybe to talk about some of the stepping stones of the big moments for you. But what is that? I mean, we say Fort Knox, so because I'm a James Bond fan, obviously, I've got Odd Job with a bowler hat,
all of my British friends draw the same conclusion when I say Fort Knox. You're like, you mean like the movie, right?
Yeah. So it's obviously just like that, and
sure.
it has to be. So for you, when you're in that that role, I think in particular, if we focus maybe on that recruitment side of
sure.
things, how much of it is education at an intellectual level and maybe education at a kind of a behavioral human level? How does that, get measured or understood or balanced? Because we've sent them on training courses is easy, right?
Well, you're right. And I think that's really kind of elemental to what makes us different from a service academy like West Point or Sandhurst or U.S. Naval Academy. The nice thing that they have there, and my good friend, Lieutenant General Darrell Williams, who's the superintendent at West Point, has a captured audience. He's got about 4,000 to 4,400 cadets on any given year that are there. They're going through a 4-year progression program. He can control the curriculum. He can control the grading modalities. He can control the training that goes on outside of the schoolhouse. And so it's a very nice construct because there's a kind of a uniformity to it, a standardization that's very, very important, right? Because essentially it becomes a competitive process for each of these young men and women that are out there. They all want to aspire to be number one. Nobody wants to be the GOAT in the class. And GOAT in this instance doesn't mean greatest of all time. But they want to make sure that they are controlling that uniformity and standardization of the process.
So it's its own ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And it is very much an ecosystem. And obviously it's much different than the normal college experience, as we all can assess. What I think is our challenge in ROTC is we've got about 275 what we call host programs, where we've planted the flag and we've got a lieutenant colonel that's in charge of a program, and they're running that program. And then we've got extension units that shoot out from that. And then we've got what we call crosstown opportunities, where cadets who are at a school that doesn't have ROTC can actually drive to the campus where we host a program. And so when you take a look at that, it's about 975 colleges and universities, all of whom have a different grading system, all of whom have different scales and tiers of excellence, if you will, if you wanted to tier rank the university systems over here. And so we have to start from this place where there's not standardization, there's not uniformity. And we have to try to find a way to equal that out so that when we place our cadets into this competitive relationship with each other to decide who's going to be number one and who's going to be number N in the process, we have fairly assessed them against all the variables out there. And so from the intellectual standpoint that you're talking about, we don't get involved necessarily in the education process outside of the class they do for ROTC. We leave that to the university. It's their responsibility to teach them bioengineering or chemistry or criminal justice or history, whereas West Point owns all of that. But what we do get involved in is standardizing the training format so that every time they go out to train, whether it's on a field training exercise or whether it's coming to what we call our cadet summer training, our advanced camp here at Fort Knox, they're getting the same uniform experience so that we've got a standard that we can measure them against. And I think that's where the behavioral aspects, the behavioral intelligence aspects come in, is we're going to tell you what the standard is. We're going to demonstrate to you how to achieve the standard. And then it's going to be up to you to find out where you fall out on that standard, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a huge amount of accountability, I guess, for these people to rationalize their own truth, because they're not going to be, not that I say West Point is mollycoddled, says the man that's never been there and doesn't understand it, but if you're in the system, it's pretty clear what's what. And with you guys, it's clear what's what, but you're going to have to really own it because the system itself won't carry you there.
Yeah, and as opposed to what you might find at West Point, where they have very strict limits on what they will and won't allow you to do. For instance, you cannot be married and attend West Point. It's just one of the rules they have, because they want you singularly focused on your studies and what you're doing. And so we find a lot of non-traditional students in Army ROTC, students that are older than the usual college age kids that didn't matriculate directly from high school into college. They'll be in their 30s. Some of them have families, some of them have other jobs. Some of them are committed in lots of different ways outside of the college experience. And so they bring this really rich tapestry, if you will, to the experience of what America is. We strive all the time to be represented with diversity in our force, and then to create this very inclusive framework so that everybody can contribute at the same level. And that's very, very hard to do. We're not perfect at it by any stretch. We're trying to get better and better at it, but we think that's essential, because ultimately we want our military, particularly our officer corps, to reflect what America looks like.
And that's an interesting statement right now, what America looks like. Which I could say what the UK looks like. I could, that's not a singularity for you. But I'm 51, so I'll give that as a point of reference that says, sure. You and I were both pre-internet, right?
Right.
And I've, the promise of what the internet was and what it's become is quite fascinating. So I'm super alert. I'm going to stay away from politics and people's names, because I
appreciate that.
That's a highway to hell if ever there was one. But what I do notice is that there is, or my perception is that there's often a shift in the youth's relationship with authority.
There is.
And, back in the day when I was young, if the doctor said you've got ding-donginitis, I went, okay. Now I'd say, how do you spell it? I'd look it up, because I probably presume they might be wrong. I don't necessarily trust. And so I just wonder, because positional power on hierarchy was inbuilt into a job title, right? Back in the day.
Right.
And I just wonder how that's shifted or changed for you in maybe the way that the youth sees that whole lifestyle or that whole relationship with positional power. It's a bit of a jump from where we are, but it's one of the most fascinating topics, I feel, right now.
No, that's a wonderful point. And I think what we're dealing with this, even in the military, right, which tends to be exceptionally by nature and by requirement hierarchical, right? Yeah. When you're in the middle of a combat situation, you can't have a discussion on what's going to happen. Somebody's got to take the lead. They've got to give orders, sometimes direct orders, so that you can achieve the objective and save lives. And so that element of what we do in the military, I don't think has changed. What has changed is I think we see much more transparency about why we're doing things and how we're doing things. And it gets back to what you said about positional authority. If we want people to trust us, if we want to legitimize our position in that positional, that power position, or that position of authority, we've got to build trust. And I think you talk about this a lot with Living Brave, with your tenants, but building trust is very, very important. And then making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to that. And so the transparency element's very, very big. We've just made a pretty significant shift in the Army from what we affectionately refer to as the shark attack to a much more collaborative and I won't say collegial, because it's really not collegial, but it is more of a collaborative and softer approach to basic trainees. We've all seen the movies, right? Pick your favorite movie about basic training, whether it's a Full Metal Jacket or something else.
Show me your war face.
There you go. Show me your war face, right? Basic trainees get off the bus, and immediately they've got somebody with a Smokey the Bear hat in their face with the knife hand, telling them that they're doing things wrong. Get down, get up, get down, get up. That kind of thing. And we always did that as an element to shake them up. Really, there was a method to the madness. Frankly, it wasn't just about having all these crazy sadists out there as drill sergeants. It was about shaking them up, breaking them out of their shell, building them down or breaking them down to the lowest level, and then building them back up as a team with a foundation of what our values are. We've found out that can be very counterproductive, frankly, for today's youth, and probably was very counterproductive for the youth of our time as well. We weren't very aware of it. And so now what we're doing is we're taking a bit of a softer approach. We are being direct. We are telling them what the expectations are, but we're trying to help them reason, what that means. As Simon Sinek would say, first ask why, ask why, not the how or the what. You're going to get to that, but why? Why are we doing this? And so we're trying to approach things in that way to offer transparency to the process and say to people, reason we're doing this, let us demonstrate to you what this reason is, because at the end of the day, we want you to be able to shoot, move, and communicate like a United States soldier. And we've only got a certain amount of time to achieve that. And in order to do that, we've got to pull away some of what you are and make you conform to some of what we are, because that's going to be important in the final process.
So there's something about obedience versus submissiveness, isn't there? There's,
there is, yeah.
I need you to do it, but I don't want you to be submissive, because if you're submissive and you need to say something, you might not.
Well, and so one of the things that I talk to people about all the time, when people ask me what's the difference in a first world power like the British Army, the United States Army, or others, and other armies that where there may be lots of resources to apply, whether that's North Korea or China or others, and the Russians included in that, is the ability to do two things. This is my belief. This is not Army doctrine, but the ability to be able to combine fires and maneuver for lethal effect. Okay, so that's kind of the killing part of war. But the other one is a professional non-commissioned officer corps. Every military out there has a professional officer corps. It doesn't matter where you go, any country in the world, from the most nascent with regards to their military capability to the most advanced in the Western world, you will find all of them have an officer academy. They have a place where they send officers. And it tends to be very erudite in some places, right? It tends to be very aloof. It tends to be very above the proletariat, if you will. But what they don't have, and what we do really well in our Army, in the British Army, in the Australian Army, and others, is we build a non-commissioned officer corps that can think on its own, take initiative, understand what the shared vision is, and then carry out the mission without an officer if required. That's kind of what we train them to do. And so, like you said, it's that obedience versus submissiveness. We don't want them to be submissive. We want them to be free thinkers. We want them to take the initiative. They have to have obedience because we have to have some structure. But we know at the end of the day, if there are two people on a battlefield, one of them is going to be in charge. That's just how we work. And so that professional non-commissioned officer corps is very important. And I try to instill that in our ROTC cadets so they understand, hey, you're going to come into the Army with lots of formal training, institutional training, but you haven't done a whole lot of OJT yet. You haven't done anything on the job. So you need to pay attention to what our NCOs are saying to you, what they're teaching you, and how they're going to carry you to make you successful, because it's just so very powerful.
So for you, when you kind of look at, I guess, the role that you're in, are there's questions about how you got there, which is, maybe that sort of first leading question for some people. But when people maybe have that look of uncertainty or that look of doubt in their eye, I often think, I don't know if you ever came across the Colonel Tim Collins speech, when he was going into Iraq and, to leave Iraq a better place. And there was a great sort of thing about him doing that, but it was triggered off. He went to talk about one thing, saw the fear in people's eyes, and
right.
gave this speech. And I wonder, because I think in the executive world, be it military, be it commercial, there is it's easy when it's easy, right?
Sure.
But it's when it's not. And so when people are looking at you and you can't give them the answer because you're not living their life, but they want guidance or help, as in, it's too much, or I just don't know if I can see it through, or, how do you talk to them? What do you talk to them about?
Well, it's an interesting question, Guy. And we spend a lot of time talking about the attributes of leadership, right? I mean, this is the business we're in, right? We talk about leaders, we coach, we mentor, we train, and the Army's got a list of attributes that we use. Character, presence, intellect, leading, achieving, developing. And then we've got Army values that ground us, whether it's dedication or loyalty or respect or integrity or personal courage. And all of those are important and have their place. But what I have found for the exact instance you're talking about is the one thing that tends to be a bit absent, I think, in leaders, and I learned that this is more important the more senior you become, is two things really, humility and empathy. And so I have worked as a senior leader, as an executive level leader, to really, really be thoughtful about those two attributes, because they are the ones that get swept aside so quickly, right? So when you wear 2 stars or 3 stars or 4 stars, or you are a successful executive coach, you walk into the room and there's a certain persona, there's a certain expectation, a certain credibility that you carry with you. And there will be a certain deference that goes with that as well, right? And you may not be conscious of it, surprisingly. I mean, I'm the commanding general, right? That's when they talk about me, they say the CG. I've got this article in front of, a descriptor that's me. I don't think about that because it's so commonplace in our culture, but there are people out there that find that very intimidating. And they think, well, the CG needs this or needs that, so we need to make that happen. And if you don't step back and look at it with humility, you can often kind of overshoot, your objective a little bit. You can lose a self-awareness. And so when I see that trepidation that you're talking about in people's eyes, and they're unsure about the direction we're going to go, the first thing I try to think about is, okay, be humble in the approach, right? There's a time to be firm and hard, but there's also a time to say, hey, look, I'm feeling the same thing you're feeling, okay? I don't know all of the answers. It's my job to lead, and I'm going to do my best work and try to do that, but I'm counting on you to help me do this. And I think it's important that that we're going to approach this from a place of humility. And then you got to have empathy for what they're going through. Because again, there's going to be that deference. There's going to be this elevation of you as a leader that's going to say, well, hey, he's done here, get him to the car, get him to the next meeting, whatever the case may be. And it's very, very easy to forget about the people that are going to be behind you that now have to really put their nose to the grindstone and do the hard work to solve the problem. And so it is easy to separate yourself or get away from humility and empathy if you're not careful. So I really try to invest at that as an executive level leader.
I come across that a lot, and I think I really buy into this idea of maybe true strength in true vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And me showing you my vulnerability, don't confuse that with me being vulnerable. Right.
That's a great distinction, I think, because ultimately, we're getting paid at our level to make hard decisions. And as I coach my junior officers all the time, when you're in the line level, often you'll put together a series of courses of action, and you'll decide whether it's course of action 1, 2, 3, or 4, which one is best. And you can probably pick one out for a tactical level problem that is the best solution. The more senior you become, what you find is those courses of action are still there, but now none of them is the best. There's only one that is the least worst. And so that's the direction you have to go, because there are so many variables that affect the problem set. And there are so many second and third order effects that could branch off from the outcome, that you've got to try to find the least worst of the courses of action. I think that's really,
yeah, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. I was working with a CIO, global CIO, and he said, look, it's the right answer for right now.
Exactly.
Right. And one of the things he said, you've got to understand, he was talking to the team, he says, this isn't the fixed course, it's just the course. And 3.5 minutes after we leave this room, we may have to take a different course.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting because in the military, when we're working with our diplomatic partners, for instance, the military thinks in terms of ways, ends, and means. We are always thinking about the ends, right? So we give me the mission, tell me what my objective is, I'll tell you what I'll need, I'll charge the hill, I'll accomplish the objective. Because we look at things in end state. We want the end state. Diplomats are a little bit different, right? Politicians are a little bit different. They want options. They want to be traveling down the path and be able to have options so that they don't get constrained or they don't get boxed in. And so when we go often, you'll see this, you'll see it on the national level, the strategic level, the international level. We'll see friction points between military leaders and civilian leaders, not because they don't want the same things or not because they don't get along or don't respect each other's cultures or backgrounds. It's because our strategic leaders on the civilian side are looking for options. They don't want to be boxed in by in-state. And our military leaders have been trained to look for an in-state solution. And so that's a transition we have to make as senior military leaders when we get really to the flag officer level, to start thinking more in terms of what gives our civilian leadership the most options.
It's there's only one quote I can ever remember. And it's by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it's the sign of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing truths and still function.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think that's it, isn't it? It's that.
It is it.
Our role is to go, well, there's what we're going to do now, and then there's ultimately where we're trying to go. And actually, It's not two truths, is it? And it's how you feel. It's what the market's doing, or it's what the battle's going to do, or it's holding all these multiple truths and still functioning. And
there are so many variables.
Yeah. And maybe that's one of the biggest things about being in a senior role. It's not about necessarily making the right decision all the time, though, we would like to see a weighted percentage of you getting it right more often than not. But actually, it's the willingness to make a decision in a timely manner. And that's probably, I don't know about you, but that's one of the biggest things I find.
Well, so that's, again, one of the things that I personally coach. And I think you'll find that, at least from the Army standpoint, we tend to favor this approach. And that is, it's almost always more preferable to be decisive with less information than to wait for the 100% solution and find out you were too late to need. And that is one of the things we try to teach our officers. Hey, you're going to be in very dynamic situations. It doesn't have to be on the battlefield. It can be in the training environment or in garrison, or it could be as simple as, something happens on your installation and now you are absolutely in the public eye for what's going on. And you've got to decide, do I want to wait for all of the information until I'm at the 95% comfort level? Or am I going to make a decision based on 80% of the information? Because if I don't make the decision now, it's really not going to matter anyway. And so that's one of the things we try to teach and coach. That's the art of leadership piece. That's much different than the science of leadership piece. And I think you develop that over time, and it takes sets and reps to do that.
It does. And I think I've come to understand how people control the narrative around their decision, because people can make a decision and then somebody goes, oh, you've changed your mind. And yeah. And I'm all right with that. And it's making the decision is one thing. Owning the decision, dependent on who's pushing against it, is I think one of the bigger challenges, because it's whether or not then you're prepared to keep acting like that.
Right. And I think that becomes a challenge for military leaders often, because we like things very, very binary. We like things very linear. And so we make a decision. We want to continue along that same line. And we're not good necessarily about controlling the narrative, because we never like to stray from the absolute truth. And we know that when people control the narrative, they like to use the nuances, right? Because that's important. And I've got my public affairs officer sitting in here listening to our conversation, but her job is to help shape the narrative for our command. And so I'll say, hey, I want to come out and do this. And Nicole will go, well, sir, I'm not sure that's exactly the right way you want to say that or do that. Maybe we should look at doing this a different way. But I think it's instilled in us to shoot the straight line and then not stray at all from the absolute truth. And so I think we struggle, military leaders often struggle with that, because we like things black and white. And the world's not black and white.
It isn't, but I also look in that commercial space, and I think the people that rise to the top in the commercial space historically have been very linear.
Well, I think so. You see the exceptions around there, but they kind of know that they've got to drive the organization in a certain direction, and you can't meander down the road too much, and then find out that you're not getting to where your profit point is supposed to be, where the growth of the organization is supposed to be. And so I would agree with you. I think there is. I think it really kind of comes to that whole, as you talk about, accountability and just being brave in the moment. I think it really kind of comes down to creating a shared vision for people. And I think vision is very, very important for an organization, but it's got to be grounded in culture. And one of my favorite quotes, and I can remember one too. So here's mine for the day is Peter.
I raise your quote with my own quote.
I raised your quote to Peter Drucker, who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the point is, if you don't ground things in culture, it doesn't matter what you think the end state is for the organization or where you want to take it from a growth perspective. If there's no culture there, it's going to be awfully hard to get the buy-in that you need and create that shared vision to get to the objective.
So, John, in your career of getting to this point, do you have or can you share one or two moments where you kind of reflect back and when you do come to write that autobiography at some point and you go, those were that was a standout moment for me on a personal level. That's when I had either a self-reflection moment that I did or didn't want, or that's when I read that book or heard that poem or heard that song or that person said that thing to me and I went, oh yeah, okay. And I had a leap, I had a jump. If you've got anything like that, I think people love to hear those kind of jumps in a person's development.
Yeah, so I'll tell a war story, right? So I'm a soldier for 33 years.
Can't go wrong then.
Story's appropriate. And this is really kind of about understanding where failure has its failure has its value. And we don't get to do failure a lot in our business because the outcomes, the results of failure can often be tragic. And so don't let me soft sell that at all, because I think that's an important element of what I do particularly. But we were in Afghanistan. It was probably 2003, 2004. And we thought we knew where the big man was. We thought we had Osama bin Laden trapped in the mountains in northern Afghanistan, very rough terrain. We put together a significant armada, a large package, a special operations package that had significant ground forces, had significant air cover to be able to provide us intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, gave us firepower in the air with fighter aircraft and AC-130 support. AC-130 is this wonderful machine that can really save your bacon on the ground. And then we had this large helicopter armada, probably 18 to 20 helicopters, a significantly large flight. We were going to go in and put a group in assault an objective and hopefully be able in the same cycle of darkness to go pull them out with what we call the precious cargo, which would have been in this case Osama bin Laden. He wasn't there, so I'll go with spoiler alert, he wasn't there. But as we went in, we had planned, and because this was a very treacherous area, we were going in very heavy. Performance of helicopters at altitude gets worse and worse the higher you go. It's just a function of aerodynamics. We were going into a pretty high landing zone. And as we went in, the first aircraft went in. One of my best pilots flying this aircraft, he was the flight lead for the mission, went in, and as he went in, the aircraft behind him got below him, took some of his air, and that aircraft crashed into a riverbed. Right away, this is the initial assault into the objective, right? And already, and I'm the air mission commander, so I own all of this air armada. I've got an aircraft crashed. We haven't even gotten the Chalk 3, 4, 5, and 6 have cycled through yet. Thankfully, no one on the aircraft was badly injured. It was really more of a hard landing. And the pilots did a wonderful job making sure nobody was hurt. But the aircraft was out of commission. Now we had men on the ground that weren't supposed to be on the ground. They were in the wrong place. And as we continued to try to cycle in and put people into their LZs, we found out that many of these LZs were untenable, these landing zones. On imagery, they had looked very good. Now that we'd gotten there, the slopes were too extreme. This was way up in the Afghanistan mountains in the east part of the country. We couldn't offload. We had to go to alternate LZs. So now we had spread the ground force all over the place. It was pitch dark. Walking 100 meters up a hill was a 15-minute excursion because of the amount of gear they were carrying and what they were trying to do. Long story short, it was a spectacular failure in that we did not do what we needed to do to make the mission work. It didn't matter in the end state because the person we were looking for wasn't there. Finally, our ground force got consolidated on the objective. They chose to stay on the ground for several more days to look through the area. So that gave us an opportunity to take a pause and come back. But as I came back and I was briefing our commanding general on the mission, I was downtrodden. I was defeated. I was ready to hand over. I was a major at the time, I think. I was ready to hand over my gold oak leaf and say, sir, relieve me in place. I've failed at this mission. And he's a mentor of mine even to this day. And he took me aside. He said, John, He goes, this is what we do in combat. He goes, the important thing tonight wasn't that you didn't get people into the objective. I mean, you should have gotten them in. Planning was not what it should have been. You did everything you could. The important thing was that you didn't just completely fold up like a lawn chair after it happened. You worked the problem. You continued to make sure that the people on the ground had the support they needed, and then you recovered your entire element back here. Now, the mission took about 22 hours, so we'd been in the air for a long, long time. We'd gone well into daylight the next day, and we finally were able to get a Chinook in and sling our Black Hawk out. And then 3 or 4 days later, we went in and got the ground force and brought them out. No casualties. We were very fortunate. But the bottom line is, I think sometimes our most rich and powerful lessons come from failure. It's great to be able to, the person standing up there, on the platform like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, getting your medals put on you. But more importantly, I think sometimes is to reflect on where things have gone wrong and what your training did to help you handle that adversity. And then come out of the back end and know that your leadership was probably a difference maker in helping save lives and maybe get everybody home safe. So, more story.
So there's something massive there, isn't there, about that? Life isn't perfect, and
Oh no.
It's the old adage, we've all got a plan until we get the first punch in the face, kind of thing. But
That's
actually,
exactly what we say in the military. We say, your plan will never survive first contact. I mean, that's our adages, one of our axioms.
But you're talking there about working the problem.
The enemy gets a vote.
Yeah, you just keep walking, you keep moving, you
have to.
You keep grinding, and we'll talk about it afterwards. But right now, there's no place for your pity, right? It's
there's not. I tell my cadets all the time. I'm an Army aviator, obviously. So when I came to Cadet Command, I was looking for something to kind of make them thoughtful. And so I came up with this. I'd come up with it years ago, but I told them this. I said, hey, anybody want to tell me what rule number 1 is? And I had guys, safety, sir. Safety's rule. Leadership's rule number 1. Always get to the objective. Always rehearse. That's rule number 1. I said, no. Rule number 1 is always fly the airplane. And they looked at me like, well, sir, not all of us are going to be Army aviators. I said, yeah, it's a metaphor, right? Always fly the airplane is something I learned from my first instructor pilot. I was up flying as a Huey pilot down at Fort Rucker, Alabama. I had all of 15 hours under my belt, and we were doing these things called simulated engine failures at altitude, SEF at altitude. And you go to 1,500 feet, and the instructor pilot, without announcing it, will roll the throttle off. And then what happens is you lower the collective, you put the helicopter in an auto-rated descent, and you stabilize the aircraft, because a helicopter will actually land without power if you save the energy that's in the rotor system so you can use it at the bottom to cushion the landing. And so then there's some things you have to call out: the engine RPM, the fact that the gas producer is in its margins, and the fact that your rotor is in the green and that it is still operating so that you've got that energy you need at the bottom. And every time we would do this exercise, the instructor pilot would look for a landing area out in front of us, somewhere that we could see very easily there in the Alabama countryside. Because the idea is, when your engine fails, you want to turn to that landing area and be able to land there in an open field somewhere. Because landing in the trees is not good, even with power. And so I was up there doing this, ready to take my check ride in a couple of days, was feeling kind of froggy, felt like I really knew what I was doing. And he goes, simulated engine failure, and rolled the throttle off. So I put the collective down and I called out, RPM 6,600, N1 stabilized, rotors in the green. And he goes, where are you going to land? And now we are descending, right, at 500-600 feet per minute with no power. And I'm looking around, it's nothing but trees. He goes, where are you going to land? And now I'm starting to panic because we're getting close. And he goes, power recovery. So I rolled the throttle back up, recovered the aircraft to power. He goes, give me a left-hand turn, come back around. So I came back around, and at the moment that he had given me the engine failure, there was a big, beautiful field out to the left-hand side. But I wasn't focused on that. I was focused out here. And so I never did what I should have done, which was lower the collective and make a hard left-hand turn so that I could land to that field and have an assured landing. And when we got back, his debrief was, hey, look, you know what you forgot? He goes, you remembered your call out. You remembered the emergency procedure by the steps. You lowered the collective. You got the aircraft in trim. You did everything you're supposed to do. He goes, the thing you forgot to do, you forgot to fly the airplane. So you've always got to remember that most significant task is to fly the airplane. Don't get distracted by the things that are on the periphery. You've got to focus on the objective. So when I tell my cadets, always fly the airplane, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, that I think has to be the title of your book.
Always fly the airplane.
Always fly the plane. That's it.
I'll write that down. I'll have to
write that down now. That's not a request. That's an expectation.
I've got it.
Well, and you know, it's a beautiful metaphor for, I don't know if you've ever seen that YouTube clip of they throw the ball to each other and you have to count the passes. Have you ever seen it?
I don't think I have.
Right, I'm going to say.
I'm going to look for that now. When we get
right, there's a YouTube clip and it's called "Count the Passes," I think. And basically, I'm going to give the giveaway here, but there's a team in white t-shirts.
Oh, I have seen this. Somebody walks through the crowd, right?
And a man in a monkey suit.
That's right.
Walks right through.
I have seen that.
And of course, it says to the audience how many passes were there, and we all go 13, and some idiot goes 4, and you go, what? But the point is, apart from that, you go, but did you see the gorilla? And it's not just a gorilla, it's a bloke breakdancing.
Oh, yeah. I've seen the video.
Yeah.
And the first time I did it, I missed it, right?
We all did. I
missed it.
And because you're not looking to land the plane.
That's right.
You know, you're focused on the process and you're not looking around you. And I guess maybe that's a beautiful metaphor, you know.
Yeah,
so.
No, it is. And sometimes the kids don't get it when I tell them, but they start to get it as we reiterate it. Hey, you know, don't get distracted, because as a leader, that's going to happen, right? You're going to get distracted by the things that are going on in garrison. You're going to get distracted by the radio call. You're going to get distracted by the to see you, but you've got to stay focused on taking care of your people and accomplishing the mission.
And maybe that's that phrase is changing for your context. It's, you know, whatever happens, get your people home, or whatever happens, put the fire out, or whatever happens. It doesn't almost matter what it is. Insert phrase here.
Insert phrase here. Exactly.
But there's a bigger reason that you have to think about than maybe the context of your own anxiety.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, John, I am alert to time, and maybe one of my sort of my final questions, which is going to feel like and I feel as if you might have answered it in what you've just said, but I'm going to search for another nugget of gold because I've you already. Is if you reflect on maybe that piece of advice or counsel that you're most maybe proud of, not because you're carrying pride, but that recognition of, yeah, I was asked this question, or I could see where that person was, and me being able to offer that counsel or that phrase or whatever it is, that I think changed a life or really helped that person move forward. So I'd like to know maybe this thing that you go, do you know what? That's one of the things I'm proudest of having said or delivered to a person or a team or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I think if I could boil that down in the context of leadership, really, I'm sure I've given a little nuggets here or there based on a particular.
I'm sure you have.
Yes. But with regards to your leadership holistically, what I tell all the time, I tell people this, and I watch officers over control. I tell them, empower your team, empower your people. They will surprise you. Big believer in empowerment. So there's got to be trust, right? There's got to be shared vision. There's got to be accountability. But for those people that you know are doing the right things day to day, load them up, empower them, give them some authority of their own, and they will absolutely surprise you with the outcome. And I think that's been a real element for any success I've enjoyed. We call it in the Army, we call it mission command. That is, give people clear guidance, give them a lane to operate in, and then let them go. And so I think any success that I may have had as a leader really comes from this mission command approach, this empowering people approach, because I'm all the time just amazed by what people can do. They think so much broader than the confines of what you understand and what you know. Because as smart as you may be, you don't know all the answers. So empower people and they will surprise you.
Well, John, I would like to talk to you for the next couple of days until somebody taps you on the shoulder and says you really have to go and do something else, sir.
This has been fun. I've enjoyed this. This is great. I could talk all day long.
The thing is, my biggest issue, and I'm really happy to share this, is I'm not shy on an opinion or two.
Oh, so, I love that. I love that.
So, I have to realize, shut up, guy, because people want to hear from the other person. But I also recognize that you and I could just do this, you know, for the foreseeable future. So maybe there's a round 2 here, John. You know,
I would love a round 2, Guy.
I would love a
We could
round 2.
absolutely
So
shape another conversation. It'd be awesome.
I will do, and maybe I've got a few ideas, so but I want to respect your time and also audience attention spans on these things are also good.
Sure.
So listen, I'm going to press the stop record button in a second. If you can just stay on with me just for a few moments, but just and I've got to, like I say, I always just have to be careful that I don't actually end the call itself. But I'll try my best not to do that. But just on a personal note, and I'm sure to those that have been listening, thank you so much for making the time in a schedule which I imagine is pretty hectic. So thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. I mean, any opportunity to share what I've learned, I'm always happy to do that. And I really appreciate the format and really appreciate you hosting. I mean, it was a wonderful exchange and time flew by. I mean, I really had a good time.
Fantastic. Off we go.